Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to moderate this last session today. Our topic, roundtable topic today is Korea's diplomatic initiatives in the 21st century. Okay? So we actually invited prominent and distinguished experts from both the United States and China. So we have 4 distinguished panelists. And then, I mean, it seems quite, the seating arrangement seems quite random, but actually it's a very carefully thought out arrangement. We had actually a couple of principles. The first one is, of course, lady first. The second one is the only lady. The second principle is the Korean participants, Korean panelists, American panelists sitting alternately. Okay. The third principle, seniority. You know what I mean? Okay. Let me just inform you a couple of things to maintain this roundtable, because this is the longest roundtable. We have like quite a crowd panelists, four panelists. So just for convenience, and with the authoritative moderator, I just would like to arbitrarily divide the entire 150 minutes arbitrarily into 3 parts. The first part will be devoted to the past of Korean diplomacy. Second part, I think this will be the main part, will be on, Korea's present. Where are we standing at the moment? Current, and then quite naturally and logically, the last part will be Korea's future. Where are we heading? Okay, so let me just briefly introduce. I know that I don't have to actually introduction here, but let me just briefly introduce our distinguished panelists, starting all the way from to my left side, Dr. Katharine Moon. She is currently SK Korea Foundation Chair of Korea Studies at Brookings Institution. Please give her a big hand. And we have, from the Korean side, we have Professor Egan of Graduate School of International Studies at Seoul National University. And Mr. Scott Snyder, who is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. And last but not least, we have Professor Chun Jae-sung, again, from Seoul National University. I don't know why we have two faculty members from Seoul National University, but anyhow, Jae-sung. Okay. We have a lot of, I believe, we have a lot of things to talk about in this panel discussion. So, without much ado, I just pinpoint to three hard facts. When we look back into the 70 years of Korean diplomatic history, first thing is that, obviously, Korea's miraculous economic success, often dubbed as the miracle on the Han River. To my knowledge, that I believe that Korea is the only country which was able to turn itself from among the poorest that were receiving international aid to an international donor country in the past century. Yeah. The second fact is political democracy. The remarkable economic success was accompanied by political democratization, which means that Korea has embraced and nourished such precious values as freedom, human rights, and liberal democracy. The third fact, together with the economic and political performance, achievements, the Korean diplomatic capacity has, for the past 7 decades, exponentially grown. So, but then on the other hand, we have still we still have the agony of the only divided nation in the entire world as of today. As well as we have such like daunting challenges as briefly mentioned by Minister Yoon Byung-se this morning. So let me just directly move into the first part, i.e. Korea's diplomatic past. But then please, I just would like to remind you that this is not, historical chronology session. So I would give you 7 minutes at the maximum, but the shorter, the better. Please consider this first round as initial remarks by each panelist, probably focusing on the overall evaluation, the achievement, and some like the drawbacks, shortcomings of Korean diplomacy in the past, some particular critical juncture, memorable moment of Korean diplomacy for the past 7 decades, and any lessons that could be drawn from such moments. And also, the continuity and change in Korea's diplomacy for the seven decades. So, the first round, as initial remarks, you will have maximum 7 minutes. But as I said, the shorter, the better. So I think it's quite ideal to start with our only lady, Cassie.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much. We have 7 minutes per round. 7 minutes per round. Okay. Okay, I misunderstood. I focused on the future much more than the past. But I think we can't think about the future without the past, so it's not that hard. First of all, thank you very much. A heartfelt thank you to IFANS and to the National Diplomatic Academy for putting on this very, very grand conference and also doing it in such a well-organized way. Those of us who attend lots of conferences, we are ever grateful when there is excellent organization. So to the Chancellor, to the President, and all of your staff members, a great big thank you. I have a special 애정 or fondness for IFANS because when I was a young graduate student at Princeton University, I was out in Korea doing archival research and interviews at IFANS back in 1990, 91, 92 or so. And so I learned about the resources, human as well as documents, and benefited greatly. So you all helped me become the scholar I came to be, so I appreciate that. And to Chancellor Yoon Duk-min, to Dr. Kim, and many others, Dr. Lee, I first met you all at an IFANS-sponsored seminar in Sokcho. It was a fantastic, fun seminar in Sokcho where we had a Konglish session. I was the main speaker for one of the sessions. I spoke in English. They asked questions in Korean. I answered back in English and Korean, and it worked beautifully. So I highly recommend hybrid linguistic communication. If you have common will and heart to get a point across, Koreans say 손짓 발짓. You can manage in all sorts of ways. I also learned that many of these fine scholars can sing very well and, of course, drink a lot. So I was in good company. My thoughts about the past. Let me first start with this, that I think I recently, last week, in preparing for President Park's visit to Washington, D.C. for her summit meeting with President Obama, I put on an event at Brookings Institution to substantively analyze U.S. ROK summits over the last 50, 60 years. I did it together with a colleague at the Woodrow Wilson Center, as well as a colleague at the Carnegie Institute. And what I found fascinating was my job was to look at summit documents, joint statements, press conferences, to look at the historical record, but also I began to read the documents as a script for a play or a movie or 연속곡, a serial drama between two relations, two countries that goes on for decades and decades. And what I found really fascinating and moving was how far South Korea has come. We always talk about the miracle on the Han, etc. But I think when you look at the growth and evolution of the diplomatic sophistication of South Korea and South Korean elites, I'm talking about the diplomatic elites, it is a phenomenal evolution. And here I'm emphasizing people power. Okay, not the revolutionary kind that overthrows authoritarian regimes, those are important too. But I'm talking about human resource development. And I think South Korea is so commendable for educating and developing human beings in such focused, competent ways that enabled people to conduct the kind of economic, political, cultural, and other forms of diplomacy for the last 50 to 70 years. I mention diplomacy because this is a really hard concept and, of course, a reality when we think about North Korea. We outside of North Korea keep wondering how to transform the diplomatic relationship with the North. But what I find interesting also, having watched and analyzed, studied North Korea's diplomatic overtures last fall, from summer through fall, I was fascinated. The North Koreans indeed do learn. Last year's forays into international, regional and international diplomacy, from the Incheon Games to the UN General Assembly meetings, etc., to diplomats being sent out to Europe, it showed me that North Koreans, having had diplomatic relations with Europe in particular for the last 10 to 20 years, and in some cases with Sweden since the 1970s, they have been forced to learn protocol, norms, international laws, etc. And I think this is something that South Koreans should keep in mind. South Koreans were also very rusty when South Korea embarked upon Western-style diplomacy back in the late 19th century, and of course even after the Korean War. All of South Korea's great heroes who dealt with the US also stumbled, fell, made mistakes, and learned to pick themselves up and go over and try again. So I want to emphasize, given that we are at the National Academy for Diplomacy, the importance of diplomacy, but also how to train people in it, the human resource element, both within South Korea and, of course, with external interlocutors, and hope that South Korea's example will also be something that North Koreans can learn from. I have one other comment about the past that I would like to ask for your correction in the future. And I speak now as a Korean American. Last week when the president came to Washington, I was at the grand gala dinner. It was a lovely, beautiful, special event. But there was also a part that was quite upsetting to me, personally, and it was this, that so many of the tributes were paid to U.S. servicemen who had given their lives in the Korean War. That's a given. Americans and Koreans and many others are eternally grateful. Human life is a precious thing. But as a Korean American, I found it very disconcerting when one of these servicemen stood up and talked about saving orphans, Korean orphans. And then I realized there is this mantra in U.S.-Korea relations, this mantra or this constant repetition, a ritualistic repetition of thanking over and over and over again the past historical actions between the South and the U.S. when Dr. Han Sung-ju just asked, we don't ask the UK to choose between China and the US. But the US also does not ask itself to go back to the 1950s over and over and over again when we're dealing with Americans. We don't ask the Brits or the French to go over World War II over and over and over again. And so I asked myself, why do Korea and America have to base their relationship primarily on something that happened in the 1950s? We need to move on. We need to have new metaphors, new symbols, new gestures of friendship that are forward-looking. And Koreans don't want to hear about orphans being saved by Americans anymore. I told some Americans that at the dinner. Korean Americans, we don't want to hear it either. No, we're not living in that world. So I think for future purposes, we need to think about the symbolisms that seem to bind countries and societies, but that sometimes can create thorns. And in that sense, forward-looking measures are what I will focus on most when I have the other round. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kathy. That's a very a sensitive and pathos-based approach to the past of Korea-US relationship. Serial drama, it's like a serial drama, particularly North Korea has learned a lot, but I think North Korea has to learn more, even more, in the coming years too. Okay, Gun, please. Right, yeah, it's on.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank IFANS and KNDA for inviting me to this signature conference of KNDA. I used to work here, and it feels great to be back. I hope I feel very at home. Being a professor at an academic institution, I would like to be a little bit academic in evaluating the past of Korea's foreign policy. And I would like to go back as far back as the pre-modern era. Pre-modern era is the era of empires. Contrary to our common sense understanding of international relations, pre-modern eras were the eras of empires like Ottoman empires, Persian empires, Roman empires, Chinese empires, Mongolian empires. So pre-modern eras were the eras of empires, and unfortunately Korea was not an empire. So pre-modern era, we did not have a meaningful diplomacy. And then after the pre-modern era, we entered a modern era, which was represented by imperialism. And imperialism, the era of imperialism was again the era of empires. And unfortunately, Korea was not, again, empires, and we were colonies. So we did not have a meaningful diplomacy. But from 1945, when we were liberated from the empires, now we came to have the true meaningful diplomacy as a sovereign, independent nation state. So from 1945, the era has become an era of modern national, sovereign, independent state. And South Korea, we had to do diplomacy from that era on. And since we did not have a lot of experiences of diplomacy, modern diplomacy, we had to do diplomacy from the scratch. And given the fact that we had to do diplomacy from the scratch, we did enormously well. We did not have any experiences of any foreign diplomacies. We did not have any diplomats in the past, but we came to build a very good diplomatic infrastructure. We came to raise very good diplomats, and we came to have a very stable security environment, and we also came to achieve a prosperous Korean society. And we were able to adjust to the changed international environment. Now, from the imperialistic era, we entered into a Cold War era, and what we did was Cold War diplomacy. And we took advantage of Korea-US alliance. We became an ally of the United States, and we took advantage of Western markets, American markets, Japanese markets, and by taking advantage of those markets, we became very prosperous. So we did enormously well, and our diplomats were very, very able diplomats, I guess. And then now we entered another era. That era was the so-called post-Cold War era. In the late 1980s, there was a gradual disruption of the Cold War structure. And again, we were able to adjust to this new era of international relations. And President Noteu, started a new framework of diplomacy called Nordpolitik, 북방외교, or Northern Politik. And he started, the government started to normalize relations with our former enemies, former Cold War enemies. And it was a very good start. So now we have, full of friends around the world. North Korea is now being isolated. And it was a very good adjustment. And then now people are talking about the return of new Cold War because we are seeing the rise of China. And now we have to ask ourselves whether or not the rise of China is making a new era, such as era of imperialism, era of Cold War, or era of post-Cold War, or era of pre-modern empires. We have to ask ourselves whether or not the rise of China is making a new era. And my answer, I'm going to give my answer shortly, my answer to that is that we are not entering a new era. I think this is the continuation of the post-Cold War international environment, and Korea's foreign policy strategy and what diplomats should do, the Korean diplomats should do in this era of rise of China, I think should be the continuation and the evolution of the post-Cold War diplomacy that we adopted after Noteu administration. So I'll stop here.
Great. I'm really eager to hear more on what you call new era, but we have a bunch of time. Scott?
Well, I'd like to also thank the organizers here at IFANS and KNDA for putting this conference on and inviting me. And of course, we've been given an impossible assignment as the first question, and that's basically to cover 7 decades of Korean diplomacy in 7 minutes. And so obviously, even with all of us together, we're going to leave a lot of holes, but I want to focus on 3 main themes that I see. One of them, I think, obviously derives from the fact that Korea is divided. And so, one of the unique aspects of Korean diplomacy that one faces, looking back historically and going forward, is this phenomenon of what diplomacy means when you're dealing in a divided nation context. And so the obsession with unification as a feature of Korean diplomacy stands out compared to almost every other country in the world, maybe except for China, cross straits at this point. And I think that what's really interesting as you look at the history is South Korea going from the weaker party vis-a-vis North Korea to the stronger party, and also the developments in terms of the international competition between the two Koreas as a component of diplomacy. A lot more to be said about that, but I'll stop there on that. Second, I think from the viewpoint of Washington, one thing that is very striking is the evolution of the alliance and actually the constancy of the alliance despite the fact that everything else has changed. And this is particularly interesting, I think, because this alliance relationship really started as a result of extreme mistrust between the U.S. and South Korea, concerned that Lee Sung-man was going to march north again. And so the relationship was really born of distrust, but it has become a partnership, and one that I think is marked by a lot of trust, as we saw last week. And so this transformation is very interesting. I think part of what it means is that Korea cut its teeth really focusing on how to manage relations with this behemoth, the United States, and had to try different strategies for managing the relationship with the United States initially. In that sense, Korean diplomacy began as, I think, kind of from a frog in the well perspective, but it has merged as one that looks at the world. And so the third thing that I would remark on, and I think this is particularly noticeable for someone like me who came here first in the 1980s, at a time when basically every conversation about global affairs that you could have ended up having to lead back to Korea, to a situation where in South Korea, people can talk about global issues that Korea is contributing to. And that, in terms of mindset, I think is a really dramatic change. And it is a result of South Korea's capacity that was driven by modernization and democratization. And so now we're in a situation where Korea can talk about being a leader in the world on issues that are not directly related to the Korean Peninsula. So I'll stop there.
Much, Scott. Division and obsession with the unification, U.S.-Korea, evolution of U.S.-Korea relationship, and also South Korea's global contribution. I think that actually summarizes the gist of Korea's 7-decade history in the past. Now, Chae-sung.
Okay, let me join them by thanking for this great opportunity in this great conference. For the past, in a word, I think the evolution of South Korean foreign policy from that of weak power to middle power. So in terms of our intention and capability, I think we now became a kind of middle power. And our upgrade of our capability coincided with the times of post-Cold War transition. So by having the bipolar system type of ceiling gone, I think we have broader range of latitude in performing our foreign policy. So the typical foreign policy for weak powers could be like hiding or bandwagoning. Sometimes some people say transcending, which means that joining multilateral institutions. But as a middle power, I think the most important objective of middle power diplomacy is how we can perform some kind of architectural, foreign policy. If we can intervene with great power politics, I don't know if it's possible. I've talked with Scott before. The scholars from great powers may doubt that. But if middle power has some intention and capability, then we might intervene with the process of great power politics. Because, as Professor Mearsheimer said in the morning session, great power politics tend to end up with great tragedy because they wish, regional hegemony and also some absolute security. So they tend to maximize their power to preserve their security. And there is a security dilemma in which, great powers cannot be sure of the intention of the other party. Maybe middle power can do something to lessen the level of strategic mistrust between great powers. Now the question is, do we have any kind of intention and capability? If South Korea alone cannot do this kind of objective, then maybe there will be other like-minded country. We first hope that Japan might be that kind of like-minded country, but maybe Japan has decided some strategic decision to be part of the US-led coalition in the great power politics. I don't mean that South Korea will not be part of the American strategy in East Asia, but maybe we can balance against great power politics itself, not against the specific great powers. Then we can perform, for the time being, the strategy of a middle power. Maybe there will be a really important point of strategic decision in which we have to, take sides, but the point is not yet arrived. So the question is, when will be that kind of strategic decision timing be? When it will be, and what is the indicator that we have to decide? So that's the first big change of our foreign policy because we evolved from weak power to middle power. The second one is that, if you look at the nature of Northeast Asian international relations, we have basically 5 powers, 2 divided nations, which is divided China and divided Korea, and 1 not normal Japan. So we are all sovereign states, but we are not that complete sovereign states because we have different ideas about what Korean people is, what Korean territory is between 2 Koreas and between these 2 Chinas. During the bipolar system, we just pursued the logic of modern state system. We pretend to be a complete sovereign units. But after the Cold War is gone, now we have some leeways to complete our modern transition as a sovereign states. Then we have a lot of very important national agenda, such as unification, normalization of Japan, which distorted the modern logic of international relations. So the middle powers now very different from great powers. We have some leeway to focus upon our incompleteness of sovereignty and then cure this abnormal state of international relations in this region. Lastly, so can we pursue the middle power diplomacy? Can we contribute to curing all the problems in this region? Maybe we focus on that task, but other powers, such as Japan, they will focus on increasing their powers only. Then we do something for public goods. Japan or other powers will do something for private goods. Then we'll lag behind at some point. So we have to strengthen our national power with this kind of middle power diplomacy.
Thank you very much, Chae-sung. A very interesting perspective, a middle power perspective on Korea's diplomacy, and I'm sure that we have some time to discuss more about the role of Korea as a middle power in the last part of this discussion. Well, as you heard, I mean, we have 4 overviews of past 7 decades, but I believe that we don't need to talk more about the past because I mean 4 overviews in themselves, I mean very clear, sharp, crispy. So I don't think we need to stay here looking into the past. So let me just take the brevity to move into the present. But just before we turning to the present, for food for thought, discussion, food for discussions. I just briefly and very shortly, I will present the outcome of survey. This survey is conducted by the IFANS exclusively for this conference on global affairs. And then, actually, the survey questionnaire distributed to over 500 Korean experts, but then approximately 20%, to put it precisely, 113 experts answered the question. So I don't have any intention to go in-depth into details of the surveys, but the survey actually is divided into 5 parts. The first one is Korea-US relationship. The second one is Korea-China relationship. The third part is Korea-Japan relationship. The fourth, U.S.-China relations and East Asian regional order. And the last section is on Korean diplomacy and unification. So I just pinpointed one question and answer from each part to provide the food for thought and discussions, not only for panelists, but also for audience. So the first interesting, that I think it's interesting as on question and answer survey result on Korea-U.S. relations. The impact of U.S. rebalancing strategy, U.S. coming back to refocusing on Asia. So, what do you think to the question of what do you think of the impact of rebalancing? As you see in the screen, slightly over half of the respondents they saw it as contributing to stability of Asia, but then 37%, which is relatively, lower, but then it's a considerable percentage. They see the rebalancing as contributing to instability in the region. Okay. On Korea-China relations, I think this is very interesting. Obviously, Korean experts' perception on the rise of China is quite dualistic, particularly on the rise of China's economy. they are quite positive. 85% it's an opportunity to South Korea. But then no less impressive percentage, namely 88%, they see the Chinese rise in military terms a grave threat to Korea, South Korea. Okay? Very like a dualistic attitude. The third question, the third one that I picked up is on Korea-Japan relations. Obviously, the absolute majority, approximately like 80% of the respondents, they ascribe the worsening bilateral relationship between Tokyo and Seoul to the Japanese perception on past history. Okay? Quite, I mean, obviously, this is, I mean, you know, reconfirming the conventional, widely held perception in South Korea, I believe. But almost like almost 90% still believe that the bilateral relationship between Seoul and Tokyo should definitely be improved. It's so sort of like it's quite the equivalent to popular dictum mood in Korea, I believe. And on the U.S.-China relationship, the current U.S.-China relationship, 65% of the experts, they think the current U.S.-China relationship is competitive rather than cooperative. But when they project sometime around 2030, the 81% of the experts, they consider it's some like a combination of cooperation and competition, the bilateral relationship between the two great powers. On Korean diplomacy and unification, 79%. This is almost like an absolute majority of the respondents see obviously prefer the United States. And another 68% said that in Korea's relationship with either with the United States or China, the most important factor is security factor rather than economic interest. I mean, those two questions, the survey outcomes, you know, empirically confirming the argument made by Professor Mearsheimer this morning. Finally, on Korean, on Korea-China relation. Well, I think there's an absolute one thing is missing. One slide page missing. But on the question, this is the final slide. On the question, which country do you think is the single most important to Korean unification? Majority of respondents pinpointed China as both the most serious disruptor to Korean unification, as well as crucial key to Korea unification. This is quite a, interesting outcome. Okay, having briefly reviewed the survey outcomes and against the backdrop, we now are going into the present situation in the region and present status of Korean diplomacy. But I just want to remind you that since this is the last and the longest session, you are all advised to have a duty to entertain the audiences. They're almost exhausted at the end of the day. This is has been quite a long day. So, to my question, your maximum length of answer to my question will be 3 minutes. No longer than 3 minutes. And I really would like to, from this time on, this the rest of the session quite lively and interactive. So, my first question is on the regional security contours, with a particular focus on the United States relationship. Is a new Cold War being forged in Northeast Asia now? Are we witnessing a return, resuscitation of traditional geopolitics in the region? That's my first question. Why don't we start from Chaesung?
Okay. This morning, Chancellor Yoon Dong-min talked about very interesting, insightful ideas, which is that we are living three periods at the same time. You know, North Korea is kind of 17th type of monarchical society. There are 20th century type of geopolitics, 21st century type of global governance, which gives light to a new mechanism such as, you know, complex interdependence and so on. So if we want to analyze the nature of Northeast Asia or East Asia security architecture, then we should have very complex lens through which we see each issue. Well, as I said, you know, Korea-Japan. For example, in Korea-Japan relations, Korea divided, Japan is not normalized. So we wasted 20th century. We didn't achieve unification. So we have to achieve unification. Japan, after the defeat of the Pacific War, we won Japan normalized, but peaceful country contributing to East Asian security. But, you know, we are in the middle of the power transition, and rise of China gives us a good opportunity in a different sense. You know, South Korea, with a very greater China, we can depend upon China in terms of our unification. Japan, maybe this is too oversimplification, but Japan can use China, use the rise of China as some excuse for normalizing Japan in terms of military power, which is good for Japan and maybe good for South Korea if there is a peaceful relations between two countries. So power transition is used by these different countries, and this situation, you know, some people say South Korea and Japan should cooperate to balance against the rise of China, but I think it is impossible because both countries are using the rise of China to their own interests. So this is a very good equilibrium for the time being. But after some time, you know, if U.S. and China blunders into the real competition, then we should move the agenda from this you know, task of completing sovereignty to the real, you know, geopolitical realpolitik. But we have some leeway before that timing. So the security architecture now is that it's very different from the normal kind of geopolitical prediction, which is predicted by other theories.
But what possibly could be, you mentioned the equilibrium of the moment in the region. What possibly could the most serious disruptor of the present equilibrium? What would you say to that?
Well, there is, if you look at the relationship between U.S. and China, it's a typical great power politics. So there is a security dilemma. If there is a more and more misperception of the other party's intention, so now U.S. think that China is becoming more malign or assertive. So if you go to Washington, there are so many China, you know, very strong, you know, hawkish kind of opinion rising. If you go to Beijing, then there is also criticism against U.S. rebalancing because they think it's a containment policy. So there is a very strong disruptor between U.S. and China, but also very much unlike Professor Mearsheimer's prediction, there is also a trend for complex interdependence, like Professor Wang said. So 21st century type of global governance is happening in this region. So both disruptor and both pacifier of the region. But we don't know which will get stronger in the future.
Okay, thank you. Kathy, you have some say to that?
Yes. First of all, I disagreed with almost everything Professor Mearsheimer said this morning. And
where's the Professor Mearsheimer?
Oh, he's probably used to it. I mean, I've been a professor at Wellesley College for over 20 years. I have some former students from Wellesley here in the audience. And I have taught and taught and taught about realist theory, but I also teach the critiques. And I think it's absolutely necessary for Koreans or any foreign audience outside of the U.S. to know that there is a diversity of views regarding China, regarding the U.S.'s rebalancing act, regarding views about Korea, the North Korea, etc. There are multiple types of views in the U.S. So one person with one very strong set of beliefs cannot speak for a whole country. And as an American, Americans love to argue, and this is American Academy. We are established, our main purpose is to argue with one another in the best possible sense. So in that light, let me offer you this. I disagree with the assessment about China as a potential threat and a great power rival to the United States as typical. Yes, it's a great power, rising great power, etc. But it is not a typical rival. Why? The U.S., no Western great power has ever had to deal with a non-Western rising great power. What is unspoken in many of these discussions in the academy, as well as the media and at the policy tables, is the issue of race, racism, cultural differences. The fear of China has something to do with Westerners' discomfort with a non-Western power rising. As an Asian American, I have to say, I find the rise of China potentially very empowering for all of Asia. Not only when Japan was the only one in the 70s and 80s, and then later Korea joined in the 80s and 90s, but with the size and the historical depth of China playing such a large role and looming large on the international arena, I think China gives a lot of political, geographical, economic weight to all of Asia. And I think, in all honesty, Asians do feel that. So, I think rather than looking at China only as a potential menace, we might also consider the ways in which China undergirds other Asian nations' power. Second point is this. Many already have talked about, as did Professor Mearsheimer, that he was assuming that China's economic growth will continue, even though he doesn't want it to succeed that much. But that's a huge assumption. A lot of people assume that it will continue. I don't necessarily hold that assumption in perpetuity, or at least in the next 50 years, or even in the 50 years. Why? We just don't know. China is a humongous, gargantuan landmass. We are not talking about a Japan or a South Korea that can achieve the so-called miracle in, a couple decades. China's income inequality, despite its high GDP, the income inequality is severely a problem. The development gap between the hinterland and the coastal areas, huge problem. And most of all, China is forcibly held together as a large landmass with a large population. It's forcibly held together as a so-called coherent country. But there's no guarantee that that coherence can be sustained over the next 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years. It has hundreds of different ethnic groups, languages, cultures, and a lot of resentment that are being forcibly contained. So if the top on the pot, right, is released, you could see internal eruptions. There's a book that a British historian wrote that describes current-day China as an empire unto itself, meaning that many different peoples and territories and cultures are brought together by force. So if we think of China as a unitary nation state, I think we need to at least have the question mark or a caveat of for how long and to what detriment for Chinese power in the long run. The last point here on China is this. I think Korea really needs to let go of nobody has brought up in this whole conference, I'm amazed, nobody's brought up the terms 하대주의, great power, obeisance. I can't stand the term, mostly because it bores me and I don't even know what it means anymore. But Koreans love to say it still. I think Koreans need to throw it away. Just put it in your delete trash box on your computer or whatever, and then remove it. Even if Korea feels stuck between China and the U.S., this is not this is not a typical 사대주의 kind of situation. South Korea and China are serious economic competitors. There are so many trade issues between China and South Korea, from Sangyong, Hynix, numerous South Korean companies, and of course the South Korea shipping industry having outstripped Japan, finally, then got nervous immediately because China is right on South Korea's heels to catch up as #1 steelmaker. So as much as South Korea's economic ties with China are strong and seem strong and hopefully will continue to grow, there always will be competition and conflict. So we're not talking about having partners that's easy and breezy in a relationship, okay? The last part is about U.S.'s balance toward Asia. You asked that as a leading question. I don't put a whole lot of grand hope on the balance. Why? Unlike Professor Mearsheimer, I think the U.S. will never, ever give up Europe as its #1 dance partner. You wanted us to be entertaining and so let me offer you that
fulfilling your job.
Let me offer you that metaphor. The U.S. will never give up Europe as its #1 dance partner. Why? Because of the historical cultural ties. Because the U.S., the Europeans, despite tensions at times, basically understand each other on a cultural communication level. Americans do not understand Asians on a basic level. And frankly, I don't think they ever will. Last thing on Japan. Just as I ask you to throw away 사대주의, the whole term and mentality in talking about South Korea's position vis-a-vis the U.S. and China, I ask you also to throw away this essentialist, constructed notion of Japan and Korea relations as forever being riddled with problems. It's historically not true. The historical issues that are plaguing us and afflicting us today weren't always so. South Korea discovered or rediscovered the historical issues as a diplomatic issue only with democratization starting in the early 1990s. Prior to democratization, historical issues were family lore, passed down from generation to generation. As a Korean American, I had my share of my father's personal resistance as a teenager against his Japanese school teachers. But they weren't brought up to the public level until democratization in South Korea. So paying attention to what happens domestically, as Professor Wang emphasized this morning, is very important. Why at certain times, at certain moments in history, are certain issues raised and certain issues not? Dokdo Takeshima, it was not always a hot-button issue between South Korea and Japan. Until the early 1990s, it was actually a non-political issue. It was an economic issue handled by a fisheries agreement. Boring, 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 boring. It wasn't this emotional issue. But in the early 1990s, you had the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas that transformed many agreements regarding fisheries, including the Japan-Korea one, and it turned into a political issue which leaders in South Korea and Japan, Yutaro Hashimoto and Kim Young-sam, both grabbed for their own political purposes domestically. They misled their countries, and they did it for political gain personally. Bottom line, we need to find ways to make these issues that seem like forever issues into manageable ones. No diplomatic issue has to be a pain in the neck forever. Otherwise, there's no point in diplomacy. We should all just give up. So I think we need to think factually, historically, that South Korea and Japan used to manage even tense relations very well. We need to go figure out how to do it.
Good, thank you. Arguments well taken, but I think it seems to me that your point, particularly the first point on China might be empowering all of Asia. I think it might be as provocative as Mearsheimer's testimony. Can I say that you see actually in rising China a potentially benign hegemon?
Well, we're going to do Konglish. Look, just because we all study
very
this.
Briefly.
Just because a power is rising, okay, and is building its military and growing in military power, that doesn't say much. We all learned this in, International Relations Theory 101. Intentions matter and threat perception matters, right? Power capabilities are neutral until intentions and perceptions merge to activate the power capability. And my emphasis, my plea, my prayer for Americans, Chinese, for all people involved in this kind of competition is we need to seek good, prudent leaders. Realist theory also emphasizes not just abstract exercises in balance of power, but prudent leadership, rational behavior.
Okay.
And this is what we're missing.
All right, thank you. Let me turn to a renowned Korean liberalist. Could I say that? On his own view on North Korean, Northeast Asian security architecture being forged now. What would you say today? We're witnessing the return of geopolitics, power politics here?
Can I spend about 10 minutes if I don't answer your next question?
10 minutes?
Yeah, or 6 minutes, right? I will not answer your next question, and I'll spend 6 minutes.
6 minutes?
Yeah.
Deal done? Is it okay to make a deal?
Yeah,
all right, but why don't you make it just 5 minutes, okay?
Okay, I would like to join Kathy.
Negotiate.
I would like to join Kathy in disagreeing with Professor Mearsheimer on almost every point that he makes. First of all, let me start with two very puzzling facts. The first is as follows. The number one economy in the world is, as you all know, the USA. And number two economy in terms of size in the world is China. And number three is Japan. And number four is Germany. And these number two, number three, and number four countries, they have risen to those rank, number two, number three, number four during the American era, American hegemony. They have risen to those places under the environment which the U.S. created. Of course, U.S. did not create it by itself, but with the collaboration of other powers. But isn't it puzzling? Isn't it puzzling? China was U.S. one of the enemies during the Cold War, and Japan again was one of the enemies. Germany was again one of the enemies. And these former enemies became number two, number three, and number four with American forces by taking advantage of American forces in the case of Japan, by taking advantage of American money, American investment in the case of Japan, Germany, as well as China. And the U.S. helped these number two, number three, and number four economies join international institutions. They helped these countries become richer and bigger and powerful. This is a very, very puzzling fact. And the second, I would like to say that the new era, the era that we are facing in Northeast Asia, the new era is the era of, first of all, co-prosperity. And here's the second fact, somewhat puzzling again. We had the so-called Greek crisis. Greek crisis, you know, the Greece was almost bankrupt. And if it was during the late 19th century or early 20th century, a lot of European empires would invade Greece and pull out some of the pillars of ancient temples and take away those temples to their museums. So they're going to invade Greece. But what European powers and all those great powers did to Greece, they wanted to help. They wanted to help Greece recover. They wanted Greece to survive. And there are, other than Greece, there are many other small, developing, very fragile, failing states. And Professor Tanaka is an expert on official development aid. And if it was during the 19th century and early 20th century, these great powers would rather colonize these small, developing, and fragile, failing countries. But now we are giving them money, and we want them survive. We want them develop. We want them prosper. So secondly, this era is not an era of imperialism, invasion, or constant fear of survival. This is an era of coexistence. See, in 1945, the number of sovereign countries was 70. Now the number is almost 200. But previously, before 1945, the number has gradually decreased from 400 to around 40. But now, after 1945, the number of sovereign countries increased from 70 toward 200. So this is an era of co-prosperity and coexistence. And this co-prosperity and coexistence were based upon three institutional, ideational, and material bases. Ideational basis is multilateralism. In the past, it was either unilateral or bilateral, but after 1945, the international order was based upon multilateralism. That is the norm, particularly after the end of the Cold War. Secondly, another institutional basis for this international order is market. Now everybody is using market. China is using market and the US is using market in order to acquire territories, resources, labor forces, commodities. You can acquire almost everything that you want through market exchanges. So market is actually settling most of the problems that we had to encounter during pre-1945 era. And thirdly, there's another M, market, multilateralism, and then MAD.
How many points do you have?
Just 1 minute. Just 1 minute.
Good, thank you.
MAD, which is mutual assured destruction. So this is a material basis of the international order that the USA created with the collaboration of other countries. Mutual assured destruction is a material basis for this new international order, and which is deterrence. Okay? And based upon these three ideational, institutional, and material bases, now we were able to create the so-called era of co-prosperity and coexistence. Therefore, Korea's foreign policy direction in the future, in the 21st century, is to strengthen multilateralism, to strengthen the market, and to solidify the deterrence system, mutual assured destruction. Between Korea and Japan, between Korea and China, between Korea and the United States, do we have any issues that greatly hurt these three pillars? Do we have any fierce disagreements over current multilateralism or current status of market or current status of deterrence system? I don't find any. I don't find any. Korea-US relations, Korea-Japan relations, even if you have historical disputes, you don't have any controversies or serious conflicts over these three pillars of international relations. Therefore, I don't think there is going to be a new Cold War in this Northeast Asia.
Well, thank you very much, Kun. I should confess that personally, I think I belong to the same school of thought. But,
oh, you're a liberal.
Yeah, but please understand, as a moderator, I should pretend to be neutral. Okay. Well, Kun's argument, as expected, it's a liberalist argument. It's not simply counter argument against Professor Mearsheimer's argument this morning. But also, I think it's a counter argument against the so-called the return of geopolitics school of thoughts. So, Scott, what would you say to the return of geopolitics in the region?
Okay, well, if Professor Mearsheimer is the lawyer for the prosecution, and if Kathy and Li Gun are lawyers for the defense, then I would probably find myself on the jury trying to sort some of this through. And actually, I mean, if you're in the policy community, you end up looking at the theoretical arguments over international relations as an interesting mental exercise, but generally speaking, it's probably dangerous to take policy advice from theorists. It would be the rule of thumb that I would use, because you have to deal with the real world. And so when I look at the real world situation in Northeast Asia, I think we've got to go back and try to re-examine some key terms, right? And one of them is because international relations theory has entered into the picture, I have to say that balancing is different from rebalancing as defined by the Obama administration. Rebalancing is actually about changing the proportion of your overall investment portfolio and actually putting more investment into Asia, not trying to counter rising power from China. And so I would associate myself with not the China is empowering school necessarily, but the Asia is important school within American foreign policy thought. Asia is important and China's trajectory is uncertain. And so I think that really what we're focusing on is trying to hedge against that uncertainty. And it's not going to play out. There is rising rivalry, but it's not going to play out in the way that it has in the past necessarily. There are other factors. Li Gun has emphasized the market factor, but I actually think it is more of a mix of competition and cooperation, and we're going to be in that kind of situation for some period of time. I've got two other terms I want to define or redefine. One is related to middle power. It doesn't mean, just to clarify, it doesn't mean being in the middle between the United States and China. I think what Professor Chan was talking about is a theory that actually redefines power not in terms of geography, but in terms of capacity to connect. Right? Yeah. And so I think that's very important to kind of absorb, because the idea is how can you use connecting power in order to make a difference. If Mearsheimer were right, then middle power is equal to no power, and Korea is in the same situation today that it was at the end of the 19th century. And then the last term, I think, is really related to power transition. And here, I do detect that there's a gap between the way that Americans think about it and the way that maybe Koreans are thinking about power transition. I don't know, maybe this plays into Kathy's argument a little bit, because I don't think that in Washington people are taking the idea of power transition seriously. And yet here it seems like there is an inevitability to the discussion of power transition. The verdict is still out. I mean, beware straight line projections, but at the same time, China is clearly a factor that has to be dealt with. And how we deal with it is going to be very important. It's important for us not to think that this is a second Cold War. And this kind of lines up with one of Kathy's points, because the lessons from managing U.S.-Soviet confrontation are not working in East Asia, because China didn't have that experience, right? Soviet Union had that experience and the Americans had that experience, but the Americans can't apply what they learned from the Soviet Union to China. And so that's one of the challenges I think that we have, is to recognize that we actually have to start with a blank slate, because the Chinese are starting with a blank slate.
Okay, thank you, Scott. thank you very much for your directing our attention to such fundamental notions and definitions. Now, talking of my appreciation, why don't you pick up my second question? The first panelist to pick up my second question. My second question is, obviously, the recent developments in Seoul-Beijing relations. There are some voices that not only in the United States, in Korea, but also in the United States, Japan, in many countries, called South Korea is leaning toward Beijing, unquote. What do you think? I really would like to gather here from panelists from both parties, sides, the American and Korean perceptions on the perception of Korea is leaning toward China. If it's leaning toward China, is it really compatible with the Course Alliance?
Yeah.
And if there is something like a balanced, the so-called balanced diplomacy between Beijing and Washington, D.C., what would you say to that?
Yeah. Well, so I've lost absolutely no sleep about South Korea, President Park visiting Beijing. Not concerned about it for one very practical reason, and that is this particular administration has pre-briefed and post-briefed Washington on just about everything that they've done with China. And so if you're in Tokyo and you're looking at Beijing, then Seoul is a point on a line. It's two-dimensional diplomacy. Okay, if you're moving closer, if Seoul is moving closer to Beijing, they're moving away from Tokyo. That's the reason why the loudest expressions of concern on this were from Tokyo. But if you're in Washington, you know that the alliance is an anchor. It's holding South Korea into place and actually enabling effective South Korean engagement of Beijing. So the only thing that I'm really concerned about is that I do think that China is looking for weak links in the U.S. alliance network. And, there is the possibility that China is misinterpreting the situation and not fully understanding it. And I just
it might be utilized in bad sense of the term by China.
Yeah. So the longer-term issue, I think the Chinese are going to explore that. It means there will be more tests to see whether South Korea, can be swayed in a different direction. That is going to be a fact of life, I think, here in Seoul. I do have one concern longer term, and this actually, I'd be interested in hearing Professor Chun's views on this, because he mentioned earlier that South Korea has traditionally bandwagoned. Okay. And I'm not worried about South Korea moving closer to China because the U.S. is the dominant power and the rule maker for South Korea. Basically, South Korea has thrived in a made-in-the-USA international order. But if China starts to make the rules and if China reaches parity with the United States, then I start to wonder, how will South Korea deal with that situation? So near to midterm, I'm not concerned about what is happening between Seoul and Beijing. But longer term, I think that there's some open questions. It sounded like Professor Chun, though, was defining middle power choices in ways that might open up options other than bandwagoning. And so I'm very interested in hearing more about that.
So do you believe your view, just expressed, could represent the average perception in
so
Washington,
my
D.C.?
view in terms of views in Washington is that of somebody who has been watching this very closely, but most people are not watching closely. And so I think the informed foreign policy specialist who is not focused on Korea, I think did look at the picture of Xi, Putin, and Park and say, what's going on here? Something's wrong with that picture, right? And so they started to wonder. But, in practical terms, no, I don't think that. I think that basically there were some symbolic trade-offs going on, but substantively there's nothing.
Okay. Yeah, sure, please. Yeah.
I just want to add to Scott's last comment that some who don't watch, who don't analyze or study the relationship as closely as someone like Scott looked at the photograph, and people noticed her sunglasses, et cetera, et cetera. I think we need to add that the Korean media actually exacerbates this false need for choosing a partner. And the more Koreans keep emphasizing this, the more then it could become an issue. But in Washington, frankly, as you know, the U.S. deals with so many issues on a minute-by-minute basis. Nobody's sitting there staring at President Park and President Xi minute by minute. But the more Koreans, including the media, keep focusing on this question, is Korea leaning? A lot of Americans scratch their heads and saying, do we have to have a position on this? So don't force a question, don't force an answer that you aren't going to like, and don't force an answer by asking a question that's not necessary. That's...
Okay, thank you. Don't blame me. I mean, yeah. Mearsheimer actually this morning, he strongly talked about the choice between China and the United States. Okay, Jae-sung, could you please give us a Korean perspective on the perception?
Okay, I think there are ample reasons for Americans to worry about South Korea's behavior in many senses. If you look at some structures of rebalancing strategy, United States needs some diplomatic support from South Korea, like in South China Sea. President Obama said in the joint conference that if China behaves in opposition to some rules and norms, then South Korea should speak out. That means that America needs some diplomatic support in rebalancing strategy. In terms of economic structure, President Obama, just after the conclusion of TPP negotiation, saying that we will not let countries like China write the rules. That's now famous. And we didn't join TPP at the first round. So we are out of that economic aspect of American rebalancing strategy. Third issue, in terms of military, we are having a very good cooperative relations with United States in dealing with North Korea. But what is our plan to cope with the rise of China militarily if China is really trying to push America from the Western Pacific area? What's South Korea's plan? We didn't speak any word about it. On the other hand, we joined the AIIB. We are supporting China diplomatically by participating in the Beijing parade. Not support, but kind of cooperate. So what is our plan? What is our intention? I don't know exactly, but first interpretation is that our government is just want to have a good relations with both great powers, relationship-based strategy, which goes nowhere, I think. So it is not a good strategy. Having a good relations can change any time with the changes of interest structure. So it is not a good strategy. Second one, we want to maximize our interests by having an opportunistic kind of stance. That makes sense to some degree, but it will not continue. It is not endurable. So we can accumulate interests. That's fine, but that's a dilemma again. So the last option should be by participating in architectural schemes in both countries, we want to solve the basic problems of great power politics, as I said, if there is any chance. Very interesting comment by the former, the Minister Condoleezza Rice, saying that we are entering into post-Westphalian period from a very different context. She talked about the Westphalian Treaty in 1648, and then in the context that United States is building an empire, because the security structure is changing, justifying the preemptive strike. So anarchy is changing, actually. The basic organizing principle is changing into some imperial one. That failed so far. Maybe by having a more and more complex interdependence, technology, we don't know. But maybe from the 22nd century, we'll look back upon this period as some postmodern transitional times, and US and China did not vote against each other with nuclear weapons. They happened to manage, some kind of relations. I'm not saying that politics will be gone. Politics will be there, but geopolitics may be transform itself into something else. That's where middle power can intervene. So there might be some chance for South Korea to transform the nature of great power politics into something else. In that, it's a long stage. Maybe we'll have a US-China nuclear war on the Korean Peninsula. But it's a long there will be some mulling through stages, some pausing stages. So there are some roles for South Korea to lessen the strategic mistrust between these countries by providing some kind of third-party guarantee, even though we are very weak for the security dilemma. Maybe we can provide some kind of multilateral cooperative institutions as we can use North Korean nuclear problems. If we solve the nuclear issues in the future, that may say that now US and China developed some kind of geopolitical cooperative mechanism. So there are some leeway for South Korea can use. If that's the motivation, I think ultimately I think we can ease that kind of worries from the American side of the leaning toward thing. Then we need some principle to say to Chinese and to Americans, we are not siding with you, none of you, but we are having our own principles to envision the future of North Korea, which we lack now, I think, this administration.
Well, thank you. I believe that the Korean Minister of Foreign Affairs would love your view. Actually, although you pledged, you forgot the second question, but since you made such a decent argument to my last question, I would give you a chance.
Thank you very, very much for giving me an opportunity to answer your next question. I think to measure whether or not Korea is leaning toward China, we have to use some indicators. Sorry, Scott, for being academic again, but policymakers also use a lot of theories, even if they are using different jargon. So I want to be a little bit academic. Indicators. In terms of security area, if Korea is leaning toward China, there has to be some changes in Korea's security policies. So here on the far right side of the spectrum, here is Korea-US alliance, and then neutrality, and Korea-China alliance. But we haven't moved a bit toward neutrality. We still have Korea-US alliance. We still have weapon system which is interoperable between Korea and US. And Korea is trying to strengthen Korea-US alliance. No changes at all about Korea-US alliance. No changes at all about Korea's military strategy. So in terms of security area, Korea is leaning toward China? No. Indicators say that there is no leaning. In terms of economic area, if Korea is leaning toward China, yes, we are. But so does USA, so does Japan, so does UK, and so does other countries. Are we leaning toward China in terms of social and other areas, cultural areas? Yes, we are. But so does the USA, so does other allies of the United States. So what we are doing toward China is what every other US allies are doing. We are doing exactly the same thing. So I don't think Korea is leaning toward China, but people are paying attention to symbolic areas. We are having very good summit meetings with Xi Jinping. We have more summit meetings with Chinese leader than the Japanese leader. We have very good ceremonies in China, but these are all symbolic parts. And if we focus on symbolic parts, we have to remind ourselves of what happened during the Roh Moo-hyun era. Okay? Roh Moo-hyun era, a lot of people remember that the government was very anti-Japan, anti-USA, but the end result is strengthening of Korea-US alliance. We bought more US weapons, and Korea-US alliance was a lot more stronger. So let us not pay solely on the symbolic aspect of the country's relations. Let us look at the exact indicators. We are not moving anyway toward Japan. And
Okay,
if you are moving, other countries are also moving
I
too.
mean, Kun, since you are talking about the indicator,
Yes.
let me just give you a very positivist, precise indicator as an example. What about South Korea's attitude on a series of activities in South China Sea?
Attitude toward what?
Attitude toward South Korea's voice or attitude toward South China Sea. Couldn't it be possibly an indicator, if not the indicator of Korea between Beijing, China and the United States?
Well, South China Sea problem or perhaps Senkaku Daoidai problem, this is a very thorny issue. I have a different opinion. Actually, this is not a matter of the great power rivalry. This is a matter of how to delineate the post-Cold War or perhaps post-Second World War territorial borderlines. Okay. We have to ask ourselves and we have to ask all the audience whether or not empires will be back. Will we have another era of empires? Empires is about, we are not talking about informal empires, we are talking about formal empires. Empires are about territorial acquisition. You colonize other countries, you invade other countries, you absorb other countries into your own territory. So there should be a competition about territorial expansion. Okay? And is South China Sea about territorial expansion between China and other countries? In the sense that you fight a war, all-out war, you mobilize all of your military forces to invade China, for example, and colonize China, or part of China. I think this is not an era of imperial territorial expansion. This is an era of settling the unsettled issues, territorial issues, borderlines,
Okay.
historical issues, those things.
All right. Oh, yeah. You are very, very consistent in your argument and logic. Well, actually, Kathy, I'm going to turning to the last question on the present part. I'm going to bravely shorten the third part, i.e. future part. Last but not least question, which is North-South Korea relationship. On the August 25th, we witnessed a dramatic North-South Korea agreement through high-level talks that actually and was able to resolve the heightened crisis triggered by the North Korean provocation of the landmine blaster. Some also argue that it's a victory of principle toward North Korea. In terms of South Korea's approach toward the principle, victory of principle. So when we talk about Seoul's approach to Pyongyang, we tend to talk about the dichotomy between principle and flexibility. Principle is more like a closer to Korea's containment policy, if not when we go to the extreme, and flexibility is more close to like engagement policy. So every administration so far insisted that we have to make a decent strike a decent balance between flexibility principle. But we all know that it's really hard to do such a thing. So what do you think? Which at this moment of North-South Korea relationship under the strategic environment in Northeast Asia, principle should come first or flexibility should come first from the perspective of Seoul or from the perspective of the United States? What would you say?
This is maybe it's a cultural thing, but I keep hearing out of Koreans this yin and yang mentality, or Asians. It's I don't believe in a yin and yang mentality in foreign policy. Principles and flexibility have to come together. If you have just flexibility, you have no meaningful direction, first of all, in your diplomacy. You don't even know what your choices should be. And of course, you look stupid. But more important, you need to know what your real choices are, your options, and what's practical, what's not. If you have only principles, well, you can negotiate with yourself, but nobody else. I think as far as North Korea goes, in terms of the August mini-crisis at the DMZ, it was a very good example of both principle and flexibility. And why? And also being very smart and practical and focused, because you could have principle and flexibility but not be focused and persistent and smart about it. What President Park and her leadership did was to persist on the principle of accountability, but was flexible on language, first of all, and also persistent on the process. Day after day, night after night, as we know, the marathon negotiations, it never happened like that before. The other thing that's very important, I think, is the practical aspect of technology. This negotiation session, marathon session, was different from anything in the past because closed-circuit TVs were allowed to be used in the negotiation setting so that both Kim Jong-un and his elite cohort and President Park and her advisors could have 24/7 understanding of real-time developments in the negotiation process. So it's about as close to a direct negotiation meeting as North and South's political leaders ever got. So I think technology served a very practical purpose there that facilitated the principle and the flexibility. President Park also and her advisors put out one major, American officials called it soccer ball to play with. Instead of throwing out many things for the North Koreans to pick up, South Korea targeted family reunions, which is very important to the Korean public, and kept focusing on that, and then immediately went into action with follow-up meetings after the completion of the negotiation. So I think that's a good example of very good diplomacy, very sophisticated diplomacy. And the North Koreans, they learned. For those of you who may think that the South Korean propaganda was so threatening to North Koreans and the leadership's legitimacy, I agree on the one hand. But I have an alternative explanation for why the North Koreans wanted to have the speakers shut off. It's because I think they didn't genuinely understand Korean K-pop. Because when I, of a different generation, listen to K-pop, I can't understand all the words and the metaphors and the rap styles. And so I kept thinking, do North Koreans really understand what is being screamed out at them? All they knew was
They do.
Yeah, some do, but not all. And so at any rate, that's just a little aside. But we also learned something about North Koreans, which is that they are very vulnerable to Korean soft power, and including various types of information, if pop music and news sources are alternative, of course, for the North Koreans. So all in all, I think it was a very good example of hopefully we won't have many of these, but future difficulties if that were the case.
Okay, thank you, Scott. We all know that in the recent Seoul Washington summit, President Park and Obama they stated jointly that they're going to deal with the North Korean question, North Korean problem with the utmost urgency. I think it's very, very. It seems to me that they're so much determined. But my question is that given the remaining terms of presidency for Obama, just 1 year, do you think it's a realistic for United States in cooperation with South Korea to deal with North Korean question with the utmost urgency?
We definitely need some urgency in order to be able to effectively deal with this issue. It's not clear to me whether urgency is what was necessarily achieved. I think the position is still that the DPRK needs to change its mind and come back to negotiations. And so, that has not yet occurred, and therefore I think that there is a limited impact. Now, what I think is really interesting about the joint statement, actually, in light of the incredibly complex U.S.-China relationship as it currently exists, is that South Korea, with President Park, seems to be wanting to take the lead in trying to make sure that the U.S. and China both don't forget North Korea. And I think that is a constructive potential contribution that can be made, because I think compared to 10 years ago, where North Korea could rise to the top of the U.S.-China agenda and get some focus and discussion among the direct leaders, I'm not sure that that can happen today.
Okay, Jae-sung, and also Kun, how possibly could we strike a balance between flexibility and principle in our approach toward Pyongyang? What is to be done?
A very, very broad question. First, I think the collapse scenario. I think there is still a hope inside South Korea that North Korea may collapse very soon. So we have to wait for that. Not engaging with North Korea, because engagement with the collapsing North Korea will just, empower rotten North Korean leadership. So there is a hope. It is not an agreed hope among the South Korean leadership, I think, but if there is a kind of hope in the civil society, then South Korean government will have really hard time in engaging with North Korea to a full scale. So that's one thing we have to overcome. There is also an argument for the gradual unification, that unification by absorption, sudden unification will be an economic disaster because of, very used, many arguments about unification costs. I am not sure about that because we lack information about what's going on inside North Korea. So we have to make some kind of decision. My basic position is that we have to prepare for sudden collapse and probably unification by absorption, but we should not go for that intentionally. That's too much risk. Then, and also our official position, I think, is that we will go for the unification based on our unification, formula, which is gradual, peaceful, functionalist kind of unification. Then, after the reunion of the separated family, I think now is the time to go for the high-level talk between two Koreas. We will talk probably about reopening of Gimgang Mountain tour and all those small things, but without giving North Korea a really long-term roadmap which will guarantee the survivability of North Korean regime. They will not react to our proposals. So we should have some kind of second stage of trust politique. I think the basic premise of trust politique is a good thing. We need a trust. But to have a mutual trust, we should have a long-term, we should provide them a long-term roadmap in which North Korea can survive without nuclear weapons. But we should give them also credible
That's what we have done so far.
Yeah. And North Korea is very much, doubtful of South Korea's true intention of, coexistence peacefully between two Koreas, because there are some mixed signals from our government. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that Byungjin strategy. I think Kim Jong-un is not so much experienced, so he didn't realize yet that if he retains nuclear weapons, he will not succeed in economic reform. I think there is an inherent contradiction between these two purposes. Maybe it will take a couple of more years for Kim Jong-un to realize that. So in that sense, we have to wait for a little while. And then after that, so we need not just engagement, some kind of, you have to socialize Kim Jong-un, that you have to have a very realistic idea of what's happening. So keeping nuclear weapons contradicts, developing your economy. Then after that stage, then we are, seriously considering giving them economic support.
Okay, good.
My position toward North Korea policy is very simple. Let us learn from ASEAN, the Southeast Asian countries. My principle is meet as frequently as possible, but move very, very slowly. I think less slowly than ASEAN countries move. So we have to meet as frequently as possible and move as slowly as possible.
That's very important, but at the same time, it's very difficult.
Let me tell you what my position about North Korea. North Korea policy has to have certain goals. There are many goals. One of them is dismantling North Korea's nuclear program. The second is liberalizing North Korean society or North Korean regime. The third is building perhaps trust. And the fourth is ultimately unification. So we have quite a number of goals. And these goals are, let us think of these goals as indicators. Okay? And in terms of nuclear program, I think previous government and current government, we haven't done a lot to stop their nuclear program. The program is still running and they're producing more and more nuclear materials. Perhaps they are diversifying their missile programs and they are developing more missile technologies. So the previous two governments haven't done a lot. But, this government and the previous one. But the governments before these two governments, we tried to do a lot. And we reached the point where North Korea agreed to stop their nuclear program for a certain brief period. Right? So in terms of reducing nuclear threat, meeting more frequently with North Korea produces better results than not meeting and let them do whatever they want to do. So that is my first point. And secondly, liberalization, bringing more market factors into North Korea, liberalizing the society. Again, meeting with North Koreans, engaging with North Koreans would bring better results than leaving them alone. This government and previous government, we haven't made a lot of contacts with North Koreans, and we have a lot of leverage upon North Korea's liberalizing policy. And thirdly, in terms of trust, unless you meet with North Koreans, how could you build trust? I think between U.S. and North Korea, the Clinton government was, I think, reached the highest point of building the trust and dismantling North Korea's nuclear program and liberalizing North Korea. But because we haven't done a lot in terms of frequent contacts, moving very slowly at the same time, I think we haven't achieved a lot of goals. Unification, unless we build trust, unless we dismantle North Korea's nuclear program, unless we liberalize North Korea, how can we peacefully reunify with North Korea? So that is my assessment of current North Korea policy.
Okay, Kathy, you seem to have something to add?
Some thoughts about future.
Okay,
Future diplomacy, future, the future road for South Korea's foreign policy. I had prepared my remarks based on pretty much the future. And I would say one word, diversification of issues, which is already taking place in the present, as many have already emphasized. But to recap, I think the last week's summit between the two presidents of the U.S. and South Korea made it very clear that global issues of concern to many countries in the world, global health security, climate change and environment, alternative energy sources, disaster and humanitarian relief, nuclear nonproliferation, anti-terrorism, cyber-terrorism, which hasn't come up in any significant way during this conference, science and technology diplomacy, and education and investment in human resources. These are South Korea's current issues in the making and shaping, and increasingly the issues that the country and people will have to develop further and pursue. Along with issue diversification is also the diversification of actors. And I think we talk a lot about North-South relations and how do we get North Korea to the table regarding nuclear disarmament or denuclearization, as well as unification. But I want us to think beyond what seems impossible right now and imagine what would a unified peninsula look like, and how might a unified peninsula change or shift the configuration of power in the region. We focused almost solely on other powers' effect on the peninsula, especially South Korea, but we haven't thought at all, and we don't generally do this exercise of how might a unified peninsula change the dynamics, regional dynamics, geopolitically, economically, etc. We know it'll be economically very hard. We know in terms of humanitarian aid, we're going to need the world's help. So we know many of the problems. But if we think about what a unified peninsula might be, how do Koreans and others who care about unification shape the national and global interests of a unified peninsula? There will be no doubt that a unified peninsula will have different interests and different priorities than the divided peninsula. So we need to ask that question and come up with different scenarios. That question affects alliances. That question affects economic ties, the amount of development aid that Professor Tanaka would like to go to developing countries outside of the Korean Peninsula. South Korea will have less to give with unification needs at home. And also, even issues about current tensions, the NLL, the Northern Limit Line, and access to the West Sea is currently an intra-peninsular or inter-Korean issue. But might a unified peninsula then transform the West Sea into a potentially Sino-peninsular area of tension? We already know that the Chinese and North Koreans have had conflicts over access to parts of the West Sea. Would unified Korea then have an increased list of tensions with China, which then recalibrates the question about Korea having to choose between China and the United States? So looking into the future, maybe 30, 50 years down the road, maybe less, I think we need to at least ask some important questions. The other issue about actors, the transformation of actors, is domestic, going on right now in South Korea that I believe will have significant foreign policy changes in Korea's future orientation, and that is the demographic changes occurring in South Korea today. Many South Koreans know this, but don't think about it and don't want to think about it. Many foreigners don't pay attention to it at all. South Korea is experiencing one of the most rapid demographic changes in the entire world. Among all OECD countries, South Korea has the lowest birth rate and the fastest aging population. It is not Japan. South Korea loves to do everything 빨리빨리, fast. And this is another area where Korea's demographic crisis is happening very fast. To give you an example, the peak labor force for South Korea will occur in 2016, 2017. That's this coming year. The shrinking population is affecting the ROK's military assessment and plans in terms of the need for troops. So, for example, the military is reducing the number of troops for the future Korean army, South Korean army, from the current 630,000 today to 387,000 by 2020. That's just around the corner. Compulsory military service law also changed in 2012-2013 to reflect the growing heterogeneity of the population pool. What do I mean by the heterogeneity? South Korea right now has about 3% of its population who are foreign-born, non-ethnic Koreans, or of mixed ethnic background, together Korean and hyphenated Korean. By 2020, 5% of South Korea's population will be foreign-born or mixed ethnic background. By 2030, 10%, on par with some of Europe's major countries. 10% of South Korea's population will be foreign-born, immigrant, mixed race, mixed ethnic background. This is a social revolution that is happening right before our eyes today, and people are not paying enough attention to it. South Korea currently, as of last week, 중앙일보 put out a figure that right under 900,000, a little over 800,000 individuals in South Korea are part of so-called multicultural, 다문화 가족, multicultural families, mixed ethnic families. We have 300,000 women who are spouses of South Korean men from foreign countries, China primarily, Vietnam, Philippines, Kazakhstan, even Eastern Europe, Thailand, Philippines, and they are building the next generation of South Korea's young people. So when we think about demographic change, I have two major concerns, and I'm writing a book on this, so I'm that concerned. One, the impact on South Korea's democracy. One of South Korea's hallmarks to fame is its democracy. Does South Korea's democracy have the robustness, and do South Koreans have the political will to embrace and integrate what I call new Koreans? Two, that also includes defectors. We only have 30,000, but they are growing in political voice and power, and they will want more. And you talk about unification. What will a unified peninsula's political system look like? What will happen to the democracy that South Korea so painfully, sacrificially built? There's no guarantee that the trajectory will just be linear. With so many additions of diverse people, political actors, as well as resources needed. And the third here that I throw out to you as food for thought is, as demographic changes occur in a society, and America is a very good example, diasporic changes, minority politics, identity politics have significant impacts on a democratic nation's foreign policy orientations. Geopolitically, things may not change, but below that, economic ties, tourism, people-to-people exchange, there are numerous opportunities that South Korea will have, and so far we have focused foreign policy for South Korea's past, present, and future mostly on the great powers. And I think South Korea is under President Park and needs to, in the future, focus much more on diversifying relations with different countries. President Park pursued the VIP policy, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, focusing on Southeast Asia as one of her priority areas as soon as she came into office. She then went to Central Asia. She also made some of the biggest political splashes in Europe. I think these were really excellent moves to show that South Korea not only is diversifying in issue areas, but regional interests and diplomatic ties. So I think we need to think about, again, domestic society changes, it changes domestic politics, and what might be the impacts on foreign policy in the future coming from those domestic changes.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. You mentioned that it's simply food for thought, but I believe it's more than food for thought. A very critical element that we have to contemplate on, particularly the Koreans, okay? The impact of unified Korea on the region, some domestic factors, including, demographic changes and its possible potential implications in political democracy, and also diversification of South Korea's foreign policy and diplomacy. All right, picking up the last point that you made, I like to turn to Scott and Jae-sung, because since you paved the way toward Korea's future, I just want to pick up the issue of middle power diplomacy. Since Scott, you this year recently co-authored a book. I think it's a CFR policy report titled "Middle Power Korea." And also, Jae-sung, in the beginning of the session, you strongly mentioned about the prospect of middle power diplomacy. So I would like to hear from you in the future of Korea's middle power diplomacy. What is the substance? What should be the substance of Korea's middle power diplomacy in the future? Scott, would you please start?
Yeah. Well, basically, in our project, what we did was try to assess how South Korea's emergence as a host for international gatherings had measured up to Korea's capacity to conduct middle power diplomacy, self-defined. And I think one of the things that we found is that in these issue areas, as Professor Tanaka pointed out, we didn't see enough continuity from administration to administration. And if you're going to be, claiming a middle power role on some of these international issues and to try to be a thought leader on the international issues, you need a sustained commitment to the issue, not just a commitment to hosting the meeting. So on the one hand, what we found is that Korea had the leadership, institutions, vision to try to make a difference as a host, but that capacity was not being organized in a sustainable way. And so that's an important, very practical issue, I think. But I think there's also a broader, question related to middle power that is challenging and that I think has to be addressed. And that is that the middle power concept only works in the context of a benign international environment. And so these issues of regional rivalries are problematic for Korea. Because basically Korean diplomacy in this middle power role can only be effective if Korea actually has good relations with its neighbors. It has to have good relations with all of its neighbors in order to really capitalize on this concept. Otherwise, a more adverse environment really generates constraint and limits South Korea's capacity to play this role. So I just think it's important to understand that the middle power concept is really premised on the idea that there is sufficient space for South Korea to be able to act effectively in this regional context.
Okay, Jae-sung, and let me just add one particular thing on the topic. Middle power, do you think is there any room? I mean, if we think in terms of great power politics, particularly on Mearsheimer version, I hardly see any room for any middle power to play an autonomous and independent role to play in international society, except for lining herself up with one great power or another.
Right. If you look at the literature about middle power diplomacy, there are several generations. After the Second World War, we have typical middle power diplomacy by Canada, Australia, and many countries under the Cold War environments. What about the middle power behavior after the end of the Cold War? So many different things. One expectation is that the nature of international relations may be changing. If it is not changing, then still no room for middle power, not much room for middle power, as you said. If there is a typical geopolitics going on in this region, then there will be a moment when South Korea should make a strategic decision between China and United States. But if you look back upon very far into the history, like, the transition from medieval times to modern times, borrowing historical sociological perspective, then there are some really basic changes which changed the organizing principle of regional order itself, technology and demography, many things. I'm not sure. I have to study more if that kind of change is happening. But if you look at the 21st century, there are a lot of changes. So for middle power, first thing I think is that we should not over-theorize what's happening. We can turn to offensive realism, defensive realism, or liberalism, but really it is much more complex. So maybe the nature of the power field of international relations itself is changing, giving middle power some room to maneuver. Then, rather than having a very much general, oversimplistic idea about looking at Northeast Asia, security or economic architecture, I think we should focus more upon specific issues. Could there be some real good outcomes, for example, insecurity, like confidence building measures or risk reduction measures specifically? Then are there any rooms for middle power to lessen the strategic strife between these two great powers? And if we gather together all these, then it might lead up to something, a bigger role for middle power. So we should research more. I'm not sure, but maybe something is changing. So yeah.
So you have any specific plan to conduct more research in middle power?
Right. For example, North Korea. As Katharine Moon said, Professor Moon said, if there is unified Korea, I think South Korea's capability will go up in absolute terms, but our strategic dilemma will worsen, I think, because there is no bad North Korea, so we don't have any excuse to hide from the U.S.-China relations. But before unification, if we use these North Korean nuclear problems deeply, then maybe we can invite United States and China, like in the six-party talks or trilateral talks, and we have a very robust, alliance from the United States, so we can work together to persuade China to, then maybe there is one success story in checking, in solving very important geopolitical problem, which is, abnormal North Korea. Then we can start from that.
Can you find any a similar comparable historical precedents
for middle power? I don't know. Very far back into history.
Okay, let me turn to Gun.
I have just one or two very simple comments on middle power diplomacy. As you all know, middle power, the concept itself is a contested concept. It's very contested concept.
Oh, okay.
It's very difficult to figure out who the middle power is. Some people are saying that the UK is a middle power, and some people are saying UK is a great power. Some are saying Japan is a middle power, but Japanese themselves believe that Japan is a great power. So it's very difficult to figure out who the middle power is. Therefore, in order to define middle power, we have to pick a certain standard or criteria. You can define middle power in terms of capabilities, or you can define middle power in terms of behavioral patterns, or you can define middle powers in terms of identities. And I think what Korea should do is to join the middle powers who show similar behavioral patterns in terms of pursuing the so-called universal values. Okay? The universal values are very important because the universal values are the backbones of current multilateralism and also the backbones of current market mechanism. And
but let me, I'm very sorry for interrupting you. You mentioned the universal values.
Mm-hmm.
But in the first place, the universal values established by whom?
Yeah, that's
Is it
why
really established by middle powers or smaller powers?
It seems like you don't like
Aren't
me.
they really established by great powers?
Yeah, that's why I said, the so-called universal values, like, human rights, transparency, accountability, all those multilateral norms, right? Those are the so-called universal values. Of course, I have to admit that many of these universals were developed by Western powers, but we also have to admit that these universal values function very well in nourishing the so-called prosperity and coexistence in the international society. Therefore, we have to join the middle powers that show similar patterns in terms of pursuing universal values. And the reason why I'm saying this is because G2, even if China and the USA are the G2 countries, they cannot govern the globe by themselves. They need collaborations. They need help from other countries. But small developing countries, fragile, failing countries cannot help these G2 countries. But middle powers can help these G2 countries. And frequently, these G2 countries also make mistakes. For example, during the George W. Bush era, the government violated the so-called multilateralism. It unilaterally invaded Iraq. And the middle powers have to gather together with other countries to fix American unilateralism, and it was fixed. And that's what middle powers could do. And China, we cannot completely trust what China would do in terms of intellectual property right, in terms of many other things. But middle powers can join with others and try to, make requests or give some kind of, and to fix this global governance problem. So middle powers are the ones that pursue similar behavioral, universal values, showing similar behavioral patterns. And we have to identify ourselves with those middle powers. So in that sense, identifying ourselves with somewhat less universal value-oriented countries, I think that is a diplomatic, loss, I guess.
Okay.
I'm afraid.
Oh, well, thank you. Don't be depressed. Did I pressure you too much? No. Okay. I believe strongly that the greatest entertainment of the audiences are their direct participation. So I really would like to open the floor now. I'd like to welcome any questions and comments from the audiences. And please, when you raise a question or comments, please identify yourself briefly and then confine the length of your question. Don't even think about delivering a speech, okay? The maximum length, 1 minute, okay? Or 1.5 minutes. All right? And please pinpoint particular panelist to whom you direct your question.
Okay, I will do. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for all your interesting insights. My name is Won-Sun Yu, and I go to I'm a master's student at Seoul National University Graduate School of International Studies, and I would like to direct my question to Dr. Moon, who has brought many interesting and somewhat provocative questions and insights to the table. And my question is in the future of Korea. I think, if you look back 7 decades of our diplomacy and foreign policies, I think the key words here are like security alliance with the US. And I think there's increasing fear within not only policy sphere, but also scholars that the value the US has on Korea-US alliance is somewhat depreciating with ever increasing alliance with Japan. So people are fearing maybe our presence in the US foreign policy agenda is being considered indispensable, when we have always considered it to be almost like a natural given thing for the last 70 years. And if, for example, Mr. Trump becomes the president, and if he does in fact pull out much of its army from Korea, even if we still remain under the nuclear umbrella of the US, I think the future of Korea has more insecurity than we see in presence currently. So, in such prospects, what would your kind of policy recommendations, and what are your thoughts on how Korea should act in such catalytic change to our foreign policy environment? Thank you.
Could we get a couple more questions altogether? Any other questions? Okay, Kathy.
Thank you. Important and thoughtful question. A few points here. First of all, we need to keep in mind that even though South Koreans at times have felt nervous about the U.S.'s commitment to South Korea's security and the value of the alliance, it's actually also South Korea that has questioned the value of the alliance. So it's a two-way street. I think it's very unhelpful and it's historically misleading to keep the assumption that the U.S.-Korea alliance has always been good, always been solid, always necessary, etc. Right now, we're in a very strong moment. About 10 years ago, we were in a very weak, under George W. Bush, we were in a very weak alliance relationship between the U.S. and South Korea. George W. Bush with President Roh Moo-hyun. That does not necessarily mean that the alliance necessarily goes bad. Because again, when I recently was examining some of these joint statements and documents for summits, I was shocked at how many achievements George W. Bush and Roh Moo-hyun, who were ideologically on two different ends and who didn't like each other, actually were able to achieve cooperation and coordination quite well. So the state of the alliance does not necessarily, the momentary state of the alliance does not dictate major policy changes. And also that South Koreans have gone through periods of anti-Americanism, anti-US policy since the 1950s. It's not just in the late 1990s and the candlelight vigils of the early 2000s. From the 50s onward, we've always seen a fluctuating relationship. Third, the U.S. does not necessarily favor Japan in its alliance commitment to South Korea. That is a South Korean perception. I think it's a misperception. Scott used the word anchor, that the South Korean-U.S. alliance is an anchor. It is a different anchor from that of the U.S.-Japan alliance, but nevertheless, it's an anchor. We also have to keep in mind that the U.S.-Japan alliance, one of the very major purposes of that alliance is for the protection and security of South Korea under a military contingency situation. So these are not different alliances that are unlinked. They are linked. And that is why the U.S. government has been trying to work so hard to get South Korea and Japan to improve their relationship, because both of their alliance situations depend on each other. If Mr. Trump should come into power, don't fear, don't worry. I will have to go to Canada or something, because then I will have determined and decided that Americans are really crazy as a public, but I have faith in my country, men and women. We will not go crazy. But hypothetically, even if Mr. Trump were to come into power, we have to keep in mind, people, once they enter positions of authority, they do not, Mr. Obama, President Park, they don't run the countries by themselves. It's their advisors and it's the bureaucracies, the professional diplomats who actually do the day-to-day work. We already had a situation when President Jimmy Carter campaigned on the platform that he was going to withdraw troops from South Korea at a very difficult time in the late 1970s. And it was the U.S. military officials, State Department officials who said, absolutely not. Gave him the data, and he's a smart man, he had to pull back from his campaign stance. So I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this afternoon discussions. My name is Kun Park, and I'm many years ago, I think maybe a generation ago, so I was a diplomat, Korean Foreign Service officer. Now, my question is this. Recently, we had a provocation from North Korea, so we asked the meeting. We asked the particular person to come and meet with us. And that particular person is Kim Jong-un's most important what do you call elite. And he was sent, as we asked, they sent him to us. So we had a meeting. Now their request was that we stop broadcast to North Korean army across the DMZ. And then, of course, not only broadcast, I think they also asked stopping the leaflets into North Korea. So we asked them to stop provocations. In return, we accepted their request. So we I say temporarily, because not permanently. Anytime we can renew the broadcast, but we accepted that request. So now we are in a period of relaxation or kind of an
I'm sorry, Ambassador Park. Would you please get to the question?
My question is this. Their request for stopping broadcast and stopping the distribution of leaflets indicates that Kim Jong-un is facing internal disturbance, or he is afraid of a defection or some kind of possible internal disturbance. What I want to ask you is, we face the possible internal collapse or upheaval in North Korea, and we should be prepared to meet that kind of eventuality. Nobody is paying any attention. I listened to. But this is important indication that Kim Jong-un is facing some internal threat. And we should be prepared to meet that threat. Okay, my question is, how we are going to deal with this situation? Thank you.
So you're talking about the case of sudden collapse. We should be prepared for a case of sudden collapse in North Korea. Anybody volunteer to answer the question? Scott?
I just got volunteered. I mean, so What's really interesting about August 25th is that I do think that North Korea showed its vulnerability in a clear way for the first time. But then I think the question is, how can you use that vulnerability? And that gets me to an area of personal frustration in the Korean discourse about unification preparation. And that is, what do we mean? Are we talking about change in leadership? Are we talking about system? Are we talking about regime? And it seems to me that all of that has been conflated into the idea of unification by absorption, but there could be a variety of scenarios. And so I do think that preparation and careful and coherent thought is necessary. Another way of putting it is that the most likely driver for change in North Korea is actually the Park Chung-hee model. But if I recall correctly, the ROK survived and actually maintained its characteristics as an authoritarian system in the end, despite the fact that the leadership changed. And so we really do need to think very carefully about what we mean when we talk about unification and what the various kind of fine-grained differentiations in terms of scenarios might be.
Kathy?
Thank you. With all due respect, Ambassador, there are a lot of people who think about this problem, potential problem, every single day. That's their job, both in the Korean government, as you probably know, and the Korean military, U.S. military, in Washington, in Beijing, etc. So there's a lot of contingency planning, scenario planning that does go on with a variety of collapse scenarios, quasi-collapse, coup d'etat. My own personal, I don't know, it's not a wish, but the possibility is, also, let's just keep having Switzerland import Emmental cheese, which Kim Jong-un loves, and he will just explode from the weight, It's anything can happen, right? But that doesn't mean that North Korea's regime is necessarily unstable. I don't read, and a lot of scholars and Washington analysts actually, and Chinese diplomats and Chinese scholars, when you speak with them, those who frequent Pyongyang regularly in recent months have told us that there is no sign of an insecure regime or any imminent regime collapse, that Kim Jong-un's position is quite strong. It may not be strong in a democratic sense with full legitimacy, but it's not as shaky as some South Koreans want to believe. So I think one thing we have to be careful is not to wish for something based on, not to build our dreams on sand. I would rather assume that Kim Jong-un is in power and therefore is dangerous and do contingency planning than assume he's weak and therefore will collapse tomorrow, because I don't think that'll be the case. As far as responses, there are initial responses. The U.S. military, the South Korean military, depending on the scenario, will most likely put up either human or physical walls so that we don't necessarily have a migration crisis affecting South Korea. Also, what President Park's Unification Preparatory Committee has done is bring different governmental ministries and agencies together to learn to coordinate so that in the case of these kinds of contingencies, different ministries, for example, the Ministry of Health and Health and Ministry of Health, that they can deploy various personnel, facilities, equipment to take care of physical injuries, potential diseases, illnesses, etc., dehydration, refugee tents, to coordinate also with the finance ministries on what kind of resources need to be loosened up to purchase things for supplies for refugees. Also to work with different governments in the region to figure out how do you deal with a potential flow of refugees. What if there are warlords from North Korea, from the military, who spill over and into different factions once the central government loses power? There are contingencies for that as well. So people are not unprepared, The scary part is we just don't know what kind of an actual contingency will occur. And I think continued coordination, continued cooperation among the different Korean governmental groups, and I would really, really emphasize the need for intergovernmental, including Chinese, Japanese, US, Mongolian, Southeast Asian countries, working together with South Korea to look ahead at these kinds of scenarios. Because with a collapse or with any kind of change on the peninsula, this is going to be a massive, massive diplomatic, economic, social crisis that will occur. And even if it's a peaceful one, it is going to take immense human resources, financial and other resources. So my concern, my wish is that South Korea diversify its foreign policy to make as many friends as possible so that you can call on them when the crisis occurs and let them help you. Because coexistence, co-prosperity, those two concepts that Professor Ligon mentioned today several times are going to be absolutely essential in a scenario of unification or collapse.
All right, thank you very much. Well, as a moderator, I think it's a time to close our session. And I should say that as a moderator, I have not a single word to add what has been said today in this valuable, precious roundtable. And well, actually, today's beginning of today's conference, Chancellor Yoon Dong-min and Minister Yoon Byung-se started was saying that this is very special for Korea. And I would like to close today. Today is very special for Korea National Diplomatic Academy because I have a strong belief that all of us, with the collective wisdom gathered today in the morning, in the afternoon, will be contributing to a great extent to opening the next chapter for a Korea's foreign policy. Thank you very much, and please join me thanking our prominent panelists. Thank you.